The fluorescent lights of the hospital cafeteria buzzed overhead like dying wasps, casting a sickly yellow glow over the half-empty space. I wiped down the same table for the third time, my shoulders aching from the double shift, my sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor that never seemed to get clean no matter how hard I scrubbed. The smell of disinfectant mixed with burnt coffee filled my lungs, a scent I'd grown so accustomed to that I barely noticed it anymore, except on nights like this, when exhaustion made everything sharper, more unbearable. My name is Emma, and at 26, I'd already learned that life didn't hand out second chances to people like me. People who grew up in foster care. People who worked 3 jobs just to afford a studio apartment in the worst part of the city. People who were so invisible that even their own reflections seemed to look away. "Table 7 needs clearing," barked Margaret, my supervisor, without looking up from her crossword puzzle. She never looked at me directly, as if acknowledging my existence might somehow contaminate her. I grabbed the gray plastic tub and made my way across the cafeteria, my body moving on autopilot. It was nearly midnight, and the hospital cafeteria was in that strange liminal space between the dinner rush and the early morning breakfast prep. Only a handful of people remained. Tired nurses grabbing late-night coffee, a janitor eating a sandwich in the corner, and a small boy sitting alone at table 7. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with dark curls that fell into his eyes and a Spider-Man shirt that had seen better days. He was drawing on a napkin with a blue crayon, his little legs swinging back and forth under the chair, not quite reaching the floor. Something about him made my chest tighten. Maybe it was the way he sat so still, so contained, like a child who'd learned too early not to take up space. "Hey, sweetie," I said softly, approaching the table. "Are you waiting for someone?" He looked up at me with eyes so dark they were almost black, and I saw it immediately, that particular brand of loneliness that only children who've been forgotten know. I recognized it because I'd worn it myself for most of my childhood. "My mom's in surgery," he said matter-of-factly, his voice small but steady. "The lady at the desk said I could wait here." "That's good." I started collecting the empty juice boxes and cookie wrappers scattered across his table. "What's your name?" "Marco." He went back to his drawing, but I could feel him watching me from the corner of his eye. "What's yours?" "Emma." I smiled, even though my face hurt from maintaining the expression all day. "That's a cool drawing. Is that a superhero?" "It's supposed to be." He frowned at the napkin. "But I can't get the cape right." I was about to offer him a fresh napkin, and maybe find him some better art supplies when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. It was subtle, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air goes still and heavy. The conversations around us didn't stop, but they changed, became quieter, more careful. Even Margaret looked up from her crossword. That's when I smelled it. Expensive cologne, something dark and woody with notes of bergamot and smoke. It cut through the hospital stench like a knife through butter, so out of place in this fluorescent purgatory that it might as well have been a foreign language. I turned. 3 men had entered the cafeteria, but my eyes went immediately to the one in the center. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of presence that made the space around him seem smaller, as if reality itself bent slightly in his direction. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the kind that cost more than I made in 6 months. Dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and shadows, a jaw that could have been carved from granite, and eyes the color of slate before a storm. But it wasn't his appearance that made my breath catch. It was the way everyone else reacted to him. The janitor in the corner suddenly found his sandwich fascinating. Margaret's crossword puzzle became the most important thing in the world. Even the nurses at the far table fell silent, their conversation dying mid-sentence. This was a man people feared. The 2 men flanking him were clearly security. Broad-shouldered, alert, their eyes constantly scanning the room. They moved like soldiers, like men trained to identify and neutralize threats. One of them spoke into his wrist, and I realized he was wearing an earpiece. The other kept his hand inside his jacket, and I didn't need to be a genius to know what he was reaching for. The man in the center, the one who radiated danger like heat from a flame, swept his gaze across the cafeteria, and for one heart-stopping moment, his eyes locked on mine. They were cold, assessing, the eyes of a predator deciding whether you were prey or just part of the landscape. I felt stripped bare, exposed, as if he could see every secret I'd ever kept, every scar I'd ever hidden. Then his gaze moved on, and I could breathe again. Mr. Valentino! Margaret practically squeaked, jumping to her feet. Her entire demeanor had changed. The surly supervisor was gone, replaced by someone desperate to please. We weren't expecting you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Food? Anything at all? Valentino. The name hit me like a bucket of ice water. Even someone as disconnected from the city's underbelly as me knew that name. The Valentino family didn't just have influence. They were influence. They owned half the city's politicians, a quarter of its businesses, and all of its shadows. And Dominic Valentino, the current head of the family, was rumored to be the most dangerous of them all. This man, in his perfect suit with his cold eyes and his armed guards, was probably here visiting someone important, someone who mattered. Unlike me, unlike Marco. I turned back to the boy, intending to finish clearing his table and get out of the way before I accidentally made eye contact with the wrong person again. But Marco wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at Valentino with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between awe and longing, like a starving person looking at a feast through a window. Marco, come on, let's get you some fresh... But the boy was already sliding out of his chair. My heart lurched. Marco, no, wait. He was small and fast, darting between tables before I could catch him. I dropped the plastic tub, and it clattered to the floor, spilling trash everywhere. Margaret made a sound of disgust, but I ignored her, my focus entirely on the little boy who was now standing directly in front of Dominic Valentino. The security guards moved instantly, stepping forward to intercept. But Valentino raised one hand, just a slight gesture, barely there. And they froze. His attention dropped to Marco, and something flickered across his face. Not quite warmth, but not the cold dismissal I'd expected either. More like curiosity. I don't have a daddy, Marco said, his voice clear and earnest in the sudden silence. Can I spend a day with you? The world stopped. Every person in that cafeteria held their breath. This small boy, this nobody's child, had just approached one of the most dangerous men in the city and asked him to be his father for a day. I moved without thinking, my legs carrying me forward even as my brain screamed at me to stay back, to stay invisible, to stay safe. But I couldn't. This was a child, a lonely, desperate child who didn't understand that you didn't approach wolves and ask them to play house. I'm so sorry, I gasped, reaching for Marco's shoulder. He didn't mean to bother you. Marco, come on, let's go back to... Valentino's eyes found mine again. And this time they didn't move on. They pinned me in place like a butterfly under glass, and I felt every nerve in my body light up with warning. This close, I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could see the slight scar that cut through his left eyebrow, could smell that intoxicating cologne mixed with something else, something dangerous and dark, like gunpowder and leather. And you are? His voice was low, smooth as expensive whiskey, with an edge that suggested violence was never more than a heartbeat away. Nobody, I breathed. I'm nobody. I work here. Marco was sitting alone and I was checking on him, and I didn't know he was going to... I wasn't talking to you. The words were soft, almost gentle, but they cut like a blade. He turned his attention back to Marco, and I felt the weight of his focus lift from me like a physical thing. I could breathe again, but I didn't step back. Couldn't. Not while this child was within reach of something so clearly predatory. Valentino crouched down, an action so unexpected that one of his guards actually flinched. He moved with the fluid grace of someone completely confident in their ability to defend themselves, someone who'd never had to worry about being vulnerable. Up close, he was even more imposing. But Marco didn't seem afraid. The boy looked at him with something like hope, and it broke my heart. What's your name? Valentino asked. Marco Anthony Rossi. The boy stood straighter, as if giving his full name made him more official, more real. I'm 5 3/4. My mom's having a baby, but she's sick, so they have to cut her open to get it out. Something passed across Valentino's face, too quick to identify, but it looked almost like pain. Where's your father? I told you I don't have one. Marco's voice wavered slightly. He left before I was born. Mom says he's a bad man, But I think maybe he just got lost and couldn't find his way back. The innocence of it, the absolute faith that there had to be a good reason for abandonment, made my throat tight. I knew that story. I'd lived that story, and I knew how it ended, not with lost fathers finding their way home, but with children learning to navigate the world alone. Valentino stood slowly, his height suddenly overwhelming now that he was at his full stature again. He looked at Marco for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He pulled out his phone, pressed a button, and spoke quietly to whoever answered. "What floor?" A pause. "Good. Have someone bring me a chair." One of his guards immediately spoke into his wrist device, and within 2 minutes a nurse appeared with a comfortable chair, the kind usually reserved for private rooms, not cafeteria waiting areas. She set it down without a word and disappeared just as quickly. Valentino gestured to the chair. "Sit." Marco's eyes went wide. "Really?" "I have business here. You're waiting. We both sit. That's not spending a day together, but it's something." The smile that broke across Marco's face was like sunrise, pure, radiant, full of uncomplicated joy. He scrambled into the chair, his little legs dangling, and looked up at Valentino with absolute adoration. I should have left, should have picked up my drop tub, finished my shift, and forgotten this ever happened. But my feet wouldn't move. I stood there, frozen, watching this impossible scene unfold. A mafia boss and a lonely child sitting side by side in a hospital cafeteria at midnight. Valentino's eyes found mine again, and this time they held a question, or maybe a challenge. "You work here," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I managed. "Then work." He gestured vaguely at the mess I'd made. "Unless you have something else to say." It was a dismissal. Clear, absolute. I should have taken it, should have scurried away like everyone else in this room clearly wanted to do. But something in his expression, something in the way he'd crouched down for that little boy, something in the flash of pain when Marco mentioned his absent father, made me bold. Stupid, maybe, but bold. "He's just a kid," I said quietly. "He doesn't understand." "Understand what?" Valentino's voice dropped lower, became softer, and somehow that made it more threatening. "Explain to me what this child doesn't understand." My mouth went dry. What was I doing? This man could make me disappear with a phone call, could ruin my life with a word, but I'd started this, and some stubborn part of me, the part that had survived 26 years of being nobody, of being invisible, refused to back down. That people like you don't spend time with people like us. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. His eyes narrowed slightly, and I saw his jaw tighten. One of the guards shifted, his hand moving fractionally inside his jacket. Then Valentino smiled. It was a terrible smile, beautiful and deadly, like the edge of a knife catching the light. "People like me," he repeated softly. "And what kind of person do you think I am, Emma?" He remembered my name, used it like a weapon. "Someone dangerous," I whispered. "Smart girl." He turned away from me, dismissing me as easily as one might dismiss a servant. "Now do your job before I have a conversation with your supervisor about employees who don't know their place." It was a threat wrapped in politeness, and I took it. I bent down, started gathering the spilled trash with shaking hands. But as I worked, I couldn't stop watching them from the corner of my eye. This odd pair, this impossible connection. Marco was telling Valentino about his drawing, his little voice chattering away about superheroes and capes, and how Spider-Man was better than Batman because he could swing from buildings. And Valentino, this man who probably ordered deaths before breakfast, was listening, actually listening, his attention focused entirely on the boy beside him. I finished cleaning and moved away. But something had shifted in the air, something had begun that couldn't be undone. I didn't know it then, but my life had just changed irrevocably. That moment, that instant when Marco asked a monster to be his father and I dared to speak up, had set something in motion that would consume me entirely. The wolf had noticed the lamb, and there was no going back. I didn't see Dominic Valentino again that night. He sat with Marco for nearly an hour. An eternity in a world where men like him measured time in millions and threats neutralized. I watched from behind the coffee station, pretending to reorganize supplies that didn't need organizing, my hands moving automatically while my mind struggled to process what I was witnessing. Marco's mother came down eventually, wheeled in a chair by a nurse, pale but smiling, a newborn wrapped in pink blankets in her arms. The relief on her face when she saw her son was palpable, but it transformed into something else entirely when she realized who he was sitting beside. Fear. Yes, that was there. Sharp and immediate, but also recognition. She knew who Valentino was. Everyone did. "Marco," she called, her voice strained. "Come here, baby. Right now." Valentino stood with that same fluid grace, and Marco hopped down from his chair, suddenly small again without the man's presence beside him. The boy ran to his mother, but he looked back, waving with the enthusiasm only children possess. "Bye. Thank you for sitting with me." Valentino nodded once, barely a movement, but acknowledgement nonetheless. Then his slate-gray eyes swept across the cafeteria one final time, pausing on me for just a fraction of a second, before he and his guards disappeared through the doors like smoke dissipating into night air. The room released a collective breath. "Jesus Christ," Margaret muttered, her crossword puzzle forgotten. "Do you know who that was?" I said nothing, just continued wiping down the counter that was already clean. That should have been the end of it. A strange encounter, a moment of bizarre kindness from a dangerous man, and then life moving on as it always did. Indifferent, relentless, gray. I should have forgotten about slate-gray eyes and expensive cologne and the way danger felt like electricity in the air. But the universe, I was learning, had a cruel sense of humor. 3 days later, I was leaving my afternoon shift at the cafe 2 blocks from my apartment. My second job, the one that paid slightly better but required me to smile through the abuse of customers who saw service workers as less than human. My feet ached, my lower back screamed, and I had exactly 45 minutes to get home, shower, and make it to my evening shift at a call center across town. The November rain had turned the streets slick and gray, the kind of cold drizzle that seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I clutched my thin jacket tighter, dodging puddles as I hurried toward the bus stop, my breath misting in the air. I didn't see the car until it was too late. It came out of nowhere, a black SUV with tinted windows, swerving around the corner too fast. I jumped back, my heart in my throat, and my foot caught the edge of the curb. I went down hard, my palms scraping against the wet concrete, my knee cracking against the pavement with enough force to make stars explode behind my eyes. Pain lanced through my leg, sharp and immediate. I gasped, struggling to catch my breath, tasting copper where I'd bitten my tongue. The SUV screeched to a stop. For a moment, I thought they'd just drive away. That's what people did in this neighborhood. You kept your head down, minded your business, and you certainly didn't stop to help some nobody who'd fallen in the street. But the driver's door opened, and a man emerged. He was built like a tank, with a shaved head, and a scar running down the side of his face. He wore a black suit despite the rain, and when he crouched beside me, I saw the telltale bulge of a weapon beneath his jacket. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, are you hurt?" His voice was surprisingly gentle, at odds with his appearance. I tried to stand, but my knee buckled, and I would have fallen again if he hadn't caught me with one massive hand. "I'm fine," I lied, even as my vision swam. "It's okay. I need to catch my bus. You're bleeding." He looked genuinely concerned. "Let me at least get you checked out. There's a clinic 3 blocks from here. I can't afford..." "It's on me. My fault for taking that corner too fast." He was already guiding me toward the SUV, his grip firm but not painful. "Come on." 5 minutes, just to make sure nothing's broken. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to pull away, to run. But my knee was on fire, and I could feel blood trickling down my shin inside my jeans. And I was so tired. So bone-deep exhausted from fighting every single day just to survive. So I let him help me into the back seat of the SUV. The interior was all black leather and tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that cost more than I'd earn in a decade. It smelled like that same expensive cologne, bergamot and smoke and danger. My stomach dropped. "Wait," I said, suddenly alert. "This isn't..." The door on the other side opened, and Dominic Valentino slid into the seat beside me. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked up as primitive instinct warred with rational thought. He was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the fine weave of his charcoal suit, could smell that intoxicating scent that made my head spin. "Hello, Emma." His voice was exactly as I remembered it. Low, smooth, dangerous. He didn't look at me, instead tapping something on his phone with long, elegant fingers. We seemed to keep running into each other. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a question. My voice came out steadier than I felt, and I was distantly proud of that. No. He finally looked at me, and those slate-gray eyes pinned me in place. It wasn't. The driver got in, and the SUV pulled smoothly into traffic. I realized with growing horror that the doors had automatically locked. I was trapped in a moving vehicle with a man who could make me disappear without consequence, whose name was whispered in fear across the city, who had just admitted to orchestrating what I'd thought was a random accident. "Let me out." I reached for the door handle, but it didn't budge. "Let me out right now. We're taking you to get your knee looked at." Valentino's tone was mild, as if this was perfectly reasonable. "Then we're going to have a conversation." "About what?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "I don't know anything. I'm nobody. I work minimum wage jobs and live in a studio with mold in the bathroom. There's nothing I could possibly—" "Marco Rossi." He turned to face me fully, and I pressed back against the door. "Tell me about his father." The question caught me completely off guard. "What?" I don't know anything about his father. I met Marco that one night. He was waiting while his mom had surgery. That's all. His mother's name is Sofia Rossi, 28 years old. Single mother, works as a waitress at Marchetti's. He recited the information without looking at notes, as if he'd memorized it. The father is listed as unknown on Marco's birth certificate, but 6 years ago, Sofia worked at a very different establishment, a club called Crimson. Do you know it? I shook my head mutely. It was one of mine, a legitimate business on paper, but it served other purposes. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 6 years ago, someone stole from me. A significant amount of money. The man responsible worked security at Crimson. His name was Antonio Russo. The way he said the name, flat, emotionless, told me everything I needed to know about what had happened to Antonio Russo. "I still don't understand what this has to do with me," I whispered. Antonio Russo disappeared before I could recover what he took, but not before getting Sofia Rossi pregnant. Valentino's eyes never left mine. "Marco is his son." The pieces started clicking together, forming a picture I didn't want to see. "You think because the father stole from you, the son—" "No." The word was sharp, final. "I don't punish children for their father's sins, but I do believe in debts being paid. Antonio stole $3 million from me. He's dead now, found him 3 years ago in Miami. But the money was already gone. Spent. Lost. Which means the debt transfers to a 5-year-old boy." I couldn't keep the horror from my voice. "You're going to make a child pay for it to his mother." Valentino's expression didn't change. "Sofia Rossi owes me $3 million. Money she doesn't have and will never have. Not in 5 lifetimes of waitressing, which presents a problem." The SUV pulled up to a small private clinic, the kind with no signs and bulletproof glass in the windows. The driver opened my door, but I didn't move. "What kind of problem?" I asked, even though I didn't want to know the answer. Valentino's lips curved into something that might have been a smile on a different man. On him, it looked like a death sentence. The kind where I have to decide what to do with a debt that can't be paid. Some of my associates would suggest making an example, sending a message about what happens when you steal from the Valentino family. But not you? I heard the desperate hope in my voice, and hated myself for it. "I haven't decided yet." He gestured toward the clinic. "Get your knee looked at, Emma. Then we'll continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable. And if I refuse? If I just walk away right now?" His eyes went cold, all pretense of civility dropping away like a mask. "Then Sofia Rossi's debt comes due today, and little Marco will learn what it means to be the son of a thief." The threat was clear, absolute. I could run, could try to disappear into the city's shadows, but Sofia and Marco couldn't. They were known to him now, visible. And in Valentino's world, visibility was deadly. I got out of the car. The clinic was exactly what I expected. efficient, expensive, and completely silent about whoever walked through its doors. A doctor who didn't ask questions cleaned and bandaged my scraped palms and examined my knee, which was badly bruised but not broken. He gave me industrial-strength painkillers and advised rest, as if I had the luxury of taking a day off. Through it all, Valentino waited in the reception area, scrolling through his phone with the patience of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. His driver stood by the door, and I noticed for the first time that there was a second security guard positioned outside, both of them constantly scanning the street. When I emerged, Valentino stood. "Hungry?" The question was so normal, so mundane, that I almost laughed. "Are you serious? You look like you haven't eaten today. Maybe not yesterday either." His eyes traveled over me, assessing. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" I wanted to lie, to tell him I ate like a queen every night. But standing there in my worn jeans and my jacket with the broken zipper, with my scraped palms and my aching knee, I couldn't muster the energy for pretense. "I don't remember," I admitted quietly. Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify, but it looked almost like anger. Not at me, at something else. "Come on." He walked toward the door, assuming I would follow, and I did, because what choice did I have? The wolf had my scent now, and running would only make the chase more exciting. The SUV took us to a restaurant I'd never heard of, the kind with no sign, just a number on an unmarked door in a neighborhood where everything cost more than I made in a month. Valentino's driver opened the door for him, then for me, and I limped after him into a world I'd only ever seen in movies. The interior was all dark wood and dim lighting, with private booths separated by frosted glass panels. A man in an expensive suit materialized instantly, his face lighting up with what looked like genuine pleasure when he saw Valentino. "Mr. Valentino, we weren't expecting you tonight. Your usual table?" "Something private, Marco." Valentino handed his coat to a hostess who appeared from nowhere. "And send over Sophia. Tell her to bring the good wine." Marco, a different Marco, older, with silver streaking his temples, nodded and led us through the restaurant. I felt every eye on us, felt the weight of curiosity and fear from the other diners. They knew who he was. They all knew. We were seated in a corner booth so private it might as well have been its own room. The leather was butter soft, the table solid mahogany. A single candle flickered between us, casting dancing shadows across Valentino's face. A woman appeared with wine, Sophia, presumably, pouring 2 glasses of something that probably cost more than my rent. Then she disappeared, and we were alone. "Eat first," Valentino said, pushing a menu toward me. "Then we'll talk business." "I'm not hungry." It was a lie. My stomach was eating itself, but I couldn't imagine forcing food past the knot of fear in my throat. "You're going to need your strength." He leaned back, studying me with those unreadable gray eyes. "Because I'm about to make you an offer, Emma, and it's going to change your life." I picked up the wineglass with shaking hands and took a long drink, letting the smooth, rich liquid burn down my throat. "What kind of offer?" "The kind you can't refuse." His smile was back, beautiful and terrible. "Sophia Rossi owes me $3 million. You're going to help her pay it back." "How?" I laughed, the sound brittle and broken. "I can barely pay my own rent. I have $17 in my bank account and maxed out credit cards. I can't." "You can." He leaned forward, and suddenly the space between us felt impossibly small. "Because you're going to marry me, Emma. And once you're my wife, Sophia's debt becomes yours, and what's yours becomes mine. The debt will be paid. Sophia and Marco will be safe. And you," he paused, his eyes traveling over my face like he was memorizing every detail. "You'll belong to me." The world tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to find something solid to hold on to while reality reshaped itself around me. "You're insane. You're actually insane. We don't even know each other." "We'll learn." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing a business merger and not a marriage. "You need money, protection, a life that doesn't involve working yourself to death for pennies. I need a wife. Someone who won't be marrying me for my name or my money, because you don't care about either. Someone who isn't already tangled up in my world. Someone clean. Innocent." "I'm not innocent," I shot back. And I'm definitely not stupid enough to marry a man who kidnapped me off the street. Wasn't a kidnapping. Was a rescue. His eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. And you're smarter than you think, Emma. Smart enough to know you can't save Sophia and Marco any other way. Smart enough to recognize an opportunity when it's presented. Smart enough to understand that I'm not asking. The implication hung heavy between us. This wasn't an offer. It was an ultimatum dressed in wedding clothes. And if I say no, I whispered, then Sophia's debt comes due. He took a sip of his wine, casual, unconcerned. I'll give her a week to produce $3 million. When she can't, I'll take the restaurant she works at as partial payment. She'll lose her job. Then I'll take her apartment. She'll be on the streets with 2 children. And when she still can't pay, when she has nothing left to take, he let the sentence hang, unfinished. He didn't need to complete it. I could imagine the rest. You're a monster, I breathed. Yes. He didn't even flinch. But I'm a monster offering you a golden cage, Emma. Marry me, and you'll never work 3 jobs again. You'll never wonder where your next meal is coming from. You'll have everything you've ever wanted. Except freedom. Freedom is overrated. He reached across the table, and before I could pull away, his fingers closed around my wrist. His touch was warm, firm, sending electricity racing up my arm. Freedom is just another word for being alone, for being invisible, for being nobody. I'm offering you the chance to be somebody, Emma. To matter. To be seen. His thumb traced small circles on the inside of my wrist, right over my racing pulse. He could feel how fast my heart was beating. Could feel the effect he had on me even as my brain screamed at me to run. Think about it, he said softly, his voice dropping to something intimate, almost tender. Think about never having to choose between eating and paying rent. Think about having power instead of being powerless. Think about saving a little boy who reminded you of yourself, alone, forgotten, waiting for someone to choose him. He released my wrist, and I pulled back as if burned, but I could still feel the ghost of his touch, could still feel the heat of his skin against mine. I need time, I managed. You have until tomorrow night. He pulled out his phone, tapped something, and mine buzzed in my pocket. I just sent you an address. Be there at 8. Wear something nice. I'll have clothing delivered to your apartment in the morning. Come prepared to say yes, Emma, because there isn't another answer that ends well for anyone. He stood, placing several $100 bills on the table. Order whatever you want. Eat. You're going to need your strength for what comes next. Then he was gone, disappearing with his guards, leaving me alone in this impossible restaurant with impossible choices, and the ghost of his touch still burning on my skin. I sat there for a long time, staring at the candle flame, watching it flicker and dance. A server eventually came by, kind-faced and patient, and I heard myself ordering food I couldn't pronounce. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, my mind spinning in circles that led nowhere good. By the time I left, taking a cab home with money Valentino had left, because of course he'd thought of everything, I knew what I was going to do. I was going to say yes, not because I wanted to, not because I was falling for some dark romance fantasy, but because Marco's face kept flashing through my mind, that little boy with hope in his eyes, asking a monster to be his father, that little boy who deserved better than to pay for his father's sins. I was going to marry the devil to save a child I barely knew, and God help me, I had no idea if that made me a hero or just another victim. The dress arrived at 6 a.m, delivered by a woman in a sleek black uniform who looked like she'd never worn anything from a thrift store in her life. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a garment bag and 3 designer shopping bags, then disappeared down the hallway of my rundown apartment building as silently as she'd appeared. I stood in my doorway, staring at the bags like they might contain a bomb. Maybe they did. Maybe this whole thing was the elaborate setup, and I'd open them to find nothing but a reminder of how stupid I'd been to think a man like Dominic Valentino actually wanted to marry someone like me. But when I finally worked up the courage to unzip the garment bag, I found a dress that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. It was midnight blue, the color of the sky just before true darkness falls. Silk, I thought, running my fingers over the fabric. It felt like water, like something that shouldn't exist in the same world as my peeling linoleum floors and the mold creeping up my bathroom wall. The cut was elegant, a fitted bodice with a neckline that would show just enough skin to be interesting without being obscene, and a skirt that would fall to just above my knees. The shopping bags contained shoes, black heels with red soles that I recognized from magazine covers, and delicate jewelry that sparkled even in the weak morning light, filtering through my single window. There was also a small makeup bag filled with products I'd only ever seen behind locked displays in department stores, and a note, written in sharp, angular handwriting. Wear it all. The car will arrive at 7:30. Don't be late. I wanted to throw it all away. Wanted to pack my single suitcase and run to another city, another life, where mafia bosses didn't orchestrate accidents and propose marriage as a business transaction. But Marco's face haunted me, and if I was being honest with myself, brutally, painfully honest, there was something else too, the way Valentino had looked at me. Not through me, the way most people did, but at me. Like I was visible, like I mattered, like I was something more than just another minimum wage worker in a city full of them. It was dangerous, that feeling. Intoxicating. And I hated how much I wanted to feel it again. I called in sick to all 3 of my jobs. The cafe manager was pissed, the hospital supervisor was indifferent, and the call center just marked me as a no-show. It didn't matter. After tonight, I'd either be Dominic Valentino's wife, or I'd be dead. Either way, I wouldn't be showing up for tomorrow's shift. I spent the day in a strange fugue state, moving through the motions of being human, without really being present. I showered for a long time, letting the lukewarm water, the building's hot water heater had been broken for weeks, wash away the grime and exhaustion. I dried my hair, styled it as best I could with my cheap drugstore products. The makeup in the bag was intimidating, but I managed to create something that looked intentional. Smoky eyes, nude lips, a hint of color on my cheeks. When I finally put on the dress, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back from my cracked mirror looked expensive, sophisticated, like someone who belonged in Valentino's world of private restaurants and bulletproof SUVs. The dress hugged my curves in ways that made me feel both powerful and exposed. The shoes added 4 inches to my height, making my legs look longer, stronger. The jewelry, a simple diamond pendant and matching earrings, caught the light with every movement. I looked like someone worth marrying. The thought made me laugh, a bitter sound that echoed in my tiny apartment. This was all costuming. Pretend. Underneath the silk and diamonds, I was still just Emma. Nobody. Nothing. The girl who'd grown up in foster care and learned early that nobody came to save you. You saved yourself, or you drowned. Tonight, I was choosing to drown in silk and good wine. The car arrived exactly at 7:30. Not the SUV from yesterday, but a sleek black sedan with windows so tinted I couldn't see inside. The driver was different too, older, with gray at his temples and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled at me. "Miss Emma," he said, opening the back door. "My name is Thomas. Mr. Valentino asked me to drive you tonight." "Is he in the car?" I peered into the dark interior. "No, ma'am. He'll meet you at the destination." Of course. Because this was a test, I realized. A test to see if I'd actually show up. If I'd wear what he'd chosen. If I'd come when he called like a well-trained pet. The drive took 20 minutes, winding through parts of the city I'd never seen before. Neighborhoods where the streets were clean, and the buildings gleamed with wealth, where security guards stood at attention, and cameras watched from every corner. We pulled up to a building that was all glass and steel, soaring into the night sky like a monument to money and power. Thomas opened my door. "Penthouse. Private elevator. Mr. Valentino is expecting you." My heels clicked against marble as I entered the lobby. Everything was pristine, polished floors, abstract art on the walls, a security desk manned by 2 guards who nodded at me like they knew exactly who I was and why I was here. One of them pressed a button, and an elevator door opened immediately, revealing an interior lined with mirrors and more marble. The ride up seemed to take forever, and no time at all. My reflection stared back at me from every angle. A woman in a blue dress, with fear in her eyes despite the expensive makeup. A woman about to walk into a golden cage and lock it behind her. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. I stepped out into a space that defied comprehension. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, lights stretching out in every direction like fallen stars. The living room alone was bigger than 3 of my apartments combined. All modern furniture and clean lines and art that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Everything was black, white, or chrome. Cold, stark, beautiful in an inhuman way. And standing by the windows, silhouetted against the glittering cityscape, was Dominic Valentino. He turned as I entered, and I saw him register my appearance. His eyes traveled over me slowly, deliberately, taking in every detail of the transformation his money had bought. Something flickered in his expression. Satisfaction, maybe, or possessiveness. He was wearing a black suit tonight, perfectly tailored, with a white shirt open at the collar. No tie. His dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his fingers through it. He looked like sin incarnate. "You came," he said, his voice carrying across the space between us. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might try to run." He moved toward me with that predator's grace, closing the distance. "I had people watching your apartment all day just in case. I'm glad they weren't needed." The casual admission that he'd had me under surveillance should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange thrill run through my body. He'd been worried I'd run, which meant some part of him actually cared whether I showed up. "I keep my word," I said, lifting my chin. "I said I'd think about your offer. I thought about it. I'm here." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. "And what did you decide?" "You already know what I decided." My voice was steadier than I felt. "Or I wouldn't be wearing this dress." His lips curved into that dangerous smile. "Say it anyway. I want to hear you say it." This was about power, about dominance, about making me submit verbally before I submitted in every other way. I should have fought it, should have maintained some shred of dignity. But Marco's face flashed through my mind again. That little boy who didn't have a daddy, who'd looked at Valentino with such desperate hope. "I'll marry you," I said quietly. "I'll be your wife. I'll do whatever you need me to do to pay Sophia's debt. Whatever I need." He moved closer, and suddenly there was barely an inch between us. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see my reflection in his eyes. "That's a dangerous promise, Emma. Do you understand what you're agreeing to?" "I understand that you're going to control every aspect of my life." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I understand that I'm trading one kind of prison for another. But at least in this prison, a little boy gets to keep his mother. At least someone benefits from my suffering." Something dark and complex crossed his face. "You think I'm going to make you suffer, aren't you?" I met his gaze directly, refusing to look away. "Isn't that what this is about? Power and control and owning someone completely?" For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then slowly he raised one hand and traced his fingers along my jaw. The touch was gentle, shockingly so, from a man who'd threatened a child to get what he wanted. His thumb brushed across my lower lip, and I felt that electricity again, that unwanted current of attraction that made my body betray my mind. "I'm going to take care of you," he said softly, his voice dropping to something intimate. "Feed you, clothe you, keep you safe, give you everything you've never had. And in return, you're going to be mine. Completely, absolutely mine. That's not suffering, Emma. That's salvation. It's a cage. A golden one." His hand slid into my hair, tilting my head back slightly. "And you're going to learn to love it, because for the first time in your life, you won't be invisible. You won't be nobody. You'll be Mrs. Dominic Valentino. And everyone who ever overlooked you, everyone who ever made you feel small, will have to acknowledge that you matter." He was so close now that I could feel his breath against my lips. My pulse raced, and I knew he could feel it, could sense the effect he had on me despite my fear. "When?" I whispered. "Tomorrow." He released me, stepping back, and I felt the loss of his proximity like a physical ache. "We'll handle the legal paperwork tonight. I have lawyers waiting downstairs. Tomorrow morning, we'll make it official. Small ceremony, just witnesses, nothing public yet. I'll announce our marriage when I'm ready. When you're ready." I echoed. Don't I get a say? His smile was sharp. No. You made your choice when you put on that dress. Everything else is mine to decide. He gestured toward a hallway. There's a bedroom prepared for you. Your things have already been moved here. You moved my things? Before I even agreed? I told you. I don't ask, Emma. I take what I want. And I wanted you. He pulled out his phone, tapped something. The lawyers will be up in 5 minutes. Get comfortable. This is your home now. I wanted to scream at him, to throw his expensive gifts back in his face, to tell him that he couldn't just rearrange someone's life like chess pieces on a board. But the fight drained out of me as quickly as it had risen, because he could. He had. And I'd let him, because the alternative was watching an innocent woman and her children suffer. The lawyers came. 3 of them, all in expensive suits, all treating me with a deference that felt wrong. They spread papers across the dining table, a table that could seat 20, and explained in careful legal language what I was signing, a prenuptial agreement that gave me nothing if the marriage dissolved. A contract that essentially made me Valentino's property in every way except literal slavery, documents that transferred Sophia's debt to me, then immediately forgave it as a wedding gift. I signed everything. My hand was steady, my signature clear, and with each stroke of the pen, I felt the cage door closing tighter. When the lawyers left, Valentino poured 2 glasses of whiskey, expensive amber liquid that probably cost more than my security deposit. He handed one to me. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. I looked at him. This beautiful, dangerous man who'd bought me like property, who'd maneuvered me into marriage with the precision of a master chess player. This man who'd sat with a lonely child and then threatened that same child to get what he wanted. To golden cages, I replied, and drank. The whiskey burned all the way down, but I welcomed the pain. It was the last thing I'd feel that was entirely my own. Tomorrow, I would become Mrs. Dominic Valentino, and nothing would ever be the same. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I lay in a bed larger than my entire former apartment, between sheets that felt like clouds, staring at a ceiling that was too far away to seem real. The bedroom Valentino had given me was decorated in shades of cream and gold, with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. There was a walk-in closet already filled with clothes I hadn't chosen, a bathroom with heated floors and a shower that had more settings than my old car, and windows that overlooked the city from a height that made me dizzy. Everything was perfect, beautiful, suffocating. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and wandered out into the living room, my bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. The city lights still glittered below, and I pressed my forehead against the glass, watching the tiny cars move like blood cells through arteries. All those people living their normal lives while mine had been completely dismantled and rebuilt in the image of a man I barely knew. Can't sleep? I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Valentino stood in the shadows near the hallway, wearing only black silk pajama bottoms. His chest was bare, and I could see the evidence of his dangerous life mapped across his skin. Scars, some thin and surgical, others jagged and violent. He was lean muscle and controlled power. And despite everything, despite my fear and my anger, my body responded to the sight of him. I didn't mean to disturb you, I said quietly. You didn't. I don't sleep much either. He moved into the room, and I noticed he was holding a glass of what looked like whiskey. Occupational hazard. Hard to sleep when you have enemies who'd love to catch you vulnerable. Is that what I am now? I turned back to the window. One more thing you have to protect? You're my wife. As of... He glanced at his watch. 3 hours from now. Protection comes with the territory. The word wife hit me like a physical blow. In less than 3 hours, I would stand in front of witnesses and promise to love, honor, and obey a man who'd blackmailed me into marriage. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. Tell me something, I said, still facing the window so I wouldn't have to look at him. Why me? You could have any woman in the city, women who actually want to marry you, who understand your world. Why go to all this trouble for someone who's only saying yes to save a stranger? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then I heard him move closer, felt him stop just behind me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. Because of that, he said softly. Because you're saying yes to save a stranger. Because when Marco asked me to be his father for a day, you didn't look at me with fear or greed or calculation. You looked at me like I was dangerous and tried to protect him anyway. Do you know how rare that is? Someone who sees exactly what I am and still has the courage to stand between me and what I want? That's not courage. That's stupidity. Maybe. His hand came up, not touching me but hovering near my shoulder. Or maybe it's the first real thing I've seen in years. Everyone in my world wants something. Power, money, protection, status. They smile and scheme and pretend. But you're not pretending, Emma. You hate this. You hate me. And somehow that makes you the most honest person I've encountered in a decade. I turned to face him and found him closer than I'd expected. Close enough to see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. If you want honesty, here it is. I think you're a monster. I think you manipulate and threaten and destroy lives without losing sleep. I think this marriage is a game to you, and I'm just another piece on your board. And I think that someday, probably soon, I'm going to regret ever meeting you. Instead of anger, something almost like approval flickered across his face. Good. Hold on to that. The anger will keep you strong. He drained his whiskey and set the glass down on a nearby table. But know this. I might be a monster, but I'm your monster now, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. I don't need protection. Everyone needs protection, Emma. You've just been alone for so long you've forgotten what it feels like. He moved past me toward the hallway, and I thought he was leaving, but he paused. Get some rest. We have a long day ahead. Valentino? Dominic? He looked back at me. You're going to be my wife. You should probably use my first name. Dominic. I tested the word. Felt it strange on my tongue. What happens after? After the ceremony? After the papers are signed? What exactly do you expect from me? His eyes held mine, and I saw something dark and hungry move through them. Everything, Emma. I expect everything. But we'll start small. Tomorrow you'll move your things from that bedroom into mine. You'll learn my routines, my world. You'll attend events with me, play the role of devoted wife. And in private... He paused, and the air between us suddenly felt charged. In private, you'll learn exactly what it means to belong to me. Heat flooded through me. Fear and something else, something I refused to name. And if I can't be what you want, you will be. It wasn't arrogance in his voice, but certainty. Because underneath all that fear and anger, I see something else in you, Emma. Recognition. You feel it too. This pull between us. You might hate me, but you're not indifferent. And that's enough to start with. He left me standing there, my reflection ghost-like in the window. The city spread out below like a kingdom I'd never belonged to. He was right, and I hated him for it. I wasn't indifferent. Every time he looked at me, every time he touched me, I felt something ignite under my skin. Something dangerous and unwanted and absolutely undeniable. I returned to bed but didn't sleep. Instead, I watched the sky slowly lighten from black to gray to pale blue, counting down the hours until I would become someone else entirely. The ceremony took place at 10 in the morning in a private room at the courthouse. Not because Valentino couldn't have arranged something more elaborate, but because, as he'd said, he wasn't ready to announce our marriage publicly yet. I didn't ask why. Didn't want to know what political or criminal maneuvering required my existence to remain a secret for now. I wore a different dress, this one white, because apparently even a forced marriage required traditional costuming. It was simpler than the blue one, elegant and understated, with long sleeves and a modest neckline. Valentino wore a black suit, perfectly tailored as always, and looked like every dark romance fantasy come to life. The witnesses were his people, Thomas, the kind-eyed driver, and a woman named Isabella, who was apparently his lawyer. The judge was clearly on his payroll, rushing through the ceremony with practiced efficiency. I said my vows in a voice that didn't shake, slid a platinum band onto Dominic's finger, and felt him slide a matching one onto mine, along with an engagement ring I hadn't seen before, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that probably cost more than a house. You may kiss your bride. Dominic's hands came up to frame my face, tilting my head back. His eyes searched mine for a moment. looking for something I couldn't name. Then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was possession and promise, and threat all rolled into one, his mouth claiming mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. I felt his fingers tighten in my hair, felt his body press against mine, and despite everything, despite the fear and the anger and the absolute wrongness of this entire situation, I kissed him back. When he finally pulled away, we were both breathing hard. His thumb traced my swollen lower lip, and he smiled that dangerous smile. "Mine," he whispered. So quietly only I could hear. The words should have made me recoil. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in my stomach, and I hated myself for it. We signed the papers, made it legal. I was Emma Valentino now, and the woman I'd been yesterday, poor, invisible, free, ceased to exist. "There's somewhere we need to go," Dominic said as we left the courthouse. The SUV was waiting, Thomas holding the door. "Someone you need to meet." "Who?" "You'll see." We drove for 20 minutes, leaving behind the wealthy neighborhoods and heading into areas I recognized. Working class, struggling, the kind of places where people worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make rent. My stomach twisted as I realized where we were going. Marchetti's restaurant, where Sophia worked. "Why are we here?" I asked as Thomas parked. "Because debts aren't just about money," Dominic said, already opening his door. "They're about acknowledgement. Sophia needs to know her debt is paid, and she needs to understand the cost. The cost. Me. I was the cost. The restaurant wasn't open yet, but the door was unlocked. Dominic walked in like he owned the place. Which, I realized with sinking dread, he probably did. A young woman was setting up tables, and she dropped a stack of menus when she saw him. "Mr. Valentino, I'm sorry. We're not open until—" "Where's Sophia?" His voice was polite, but allowed no argument. "In the back, kitchen. I'll get her." "No need." He was already moving, and I followed, my heels clicking against the worn tile floor. The kitchen was small, hot, smelling of garlic and tomatoes and desperation. Sophia stood at a prep station, chopping vegetables with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. She looked tired, bone-deep exhausted in the way only single mothers working multiple jobs could be. When she looked up and saw Dominic, all color drained from her face. "Mr. Valentino." Her voice shook. "I'm working on getting your money, I swear. I just need more time. The debt is paid," Dominic said simply. Sophia blinked, the knife frozen in her hand. "What?" "Your debt. Antonio's debt. It's been settled." He gestured to me. "My wife took care of it." Sophia's eyes moved to me, and I saw the moment she recognized me. The cafeteria worker who'd been kind to her son. Her gaze dropped to the rings on my hand, and understanding dawned like a nightmare. "No," she breathed. "No, you didn't. You couldn't have—" "It's done," I said quietly, finding my voice. "You and Marco are safe. That's all that matters. But you—" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You married him because of us? Because of my stupid mistakes? Oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Don't be." I moved forward, took her shaking hands in mine. "Marco deserves a chance. You both do. And this way you get one." Dominic watched our exchange with that unreadable expression, and I wondered what he was thinking, if he felt anything at all, or if this was just another business transaction successfully completed. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. He handed it to Sophia. "Deed to this restaurant. It's yours now. Free and clear. Consider it a wedding gift to my wife. She seems to have a soft spot for charity cases." The cruelty of the words made me flinch. But Sophia just stared at the envelope like it might explode. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You don't need to." Dominic was already turning toward the door. "Just know that you're under my protection now. You and your children. Anyone who threatens you answers to me. Emma, we're leaving." I squeezed Sophia's hands once more. "Take care of Marco," I said. Tell him his friend Emma says hello." Then I followed my husband out of the restaurant, into the SUV, into this new life where I traded my freedom for the safety of strangers. We rode in silence back to the penthouse. When we arrived, Dominic went straight to his office, a room I hadn't been allowed to enter yet, and closed the door. I stood in the vast living room, still wearing my white dress, still wearing the rings that marked me as his property, and felt the full weight of what I'd done settle over me like a shroud. I'd saved Sophia and Marco. That was worth something. It had to be worth something, even if the price was my soul. The first week of marriage was a lesson in isolation. Dominic disappeared for hours, sometimes entire days, attending to business he never explained. I was left alone in the penthouse with nothing but luxury and silence. A bird in a gilded cage with every comfort except freedom. Thomas drove me anywhere I wanted to go, but always with instructions. Stay visible, stay safe, and never go anywhere without calling first. I had credit cards with no limits, access to stores I'd only ever seen in magazines, and absolutely no purpose. I tried to fill the emptiness. I read books from Dominic's extensive library. I explored every room in the penthouse except his office, which remained locked. I stood at the windows and watched the city move below, all those people living their normal lives while I floated above them in this sterile paradise. But at night, everything changed. At night, Dominic came home, and slowly, methodically, he began to dismantle every wall I'd built around myself. It started innocently enough. He'd insist we eat dinner together, the two of us at that enormous dining table, and he'd ask me questions, not about my past. He already knew everything about my past, had probably run background checks before he'd ever orchestrated that accident. No, he asked about my thoughts, my opinions, my dreams. What did I want to do with my life? What made me happy? If money was no object, how would I spend my time? The questions felt like traps, so I answered carefully at first, giving him nothing real. But Dominic was patient. He'd listen to my evasions with that slight smile, those knowing eyes, and then he'd circle back, asking the same question in a different way, until I gave him something true. I wanted to be a teacher, I admitted one night, after he'd worn me down with whine and persistence. When I was in foster care, there was one teacher who actually saw me, Mrs. Chen. She made me feel like I mattered, like I could be more than just another forgotten kid. I wanted to do that for other children. Why didn't you? He leaned back in his chair, watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Because teachers need college degrees, and college costs money I didn't have. Because I aged out of foster care at 18 with nothing but a high school diploma and a garbage bag full of clothes. Because survival doesn't leave room for dreams. Something dark moved through his expression. It does now. 2 days later, he handed me an acceptance letter to the city's best university, along with a full scholarship, one that, I was sure, he'd simply purchased with a donation large enough to build a new wing. Classes started in January. I should have been grateful. Should have thanked him for giving me an opportunity I'd never thought possible. Instead, I felt trapped by his generosity, suffocated by the debt that grew with every gift. I didn't ask for this, I said, staring at the letter. I know. He took the paper from my hands, set it aside and pulled me close. Not roughly, but with a certainty that said I belonged in his arms. You don't ask for anything, Emma, that's the problem. So I have to guess what you need, and give it to you anyway. That's not how relationships work. This isn't a relationship. His hand slid into my hair, tilting my head back so I had to meet his eyes. It's an obsession. Mine. And I take care of what I'm obsessed with. Then he kissed me, and I melted into him the way I always did, hating myself for the weakness even as my body craved his touch. The physical aspect of our marriage had been inevitable. Dominic was patient, more patient than I'd expected, but he was also relentless. Each night he'd push a little further. A kiss that lasted longer, hands that wandered more boldly, whispered words against my skin that made heat pool in places I didn't want to acknowledge. I'm not ready, I'd tell him, and he'd pull back. Then we wait. His restraint was somehow more intimidating than force would have been, but know that I think about it constantly. About you. About making you mine in every way that matters. 3 weeks into our marriage, he came home late one night smelling like gunpowder and something else. Something metallic and wrong. There was blood on his shirt cuff, barely visible against the dark fabric. but I saw it. "Are you hurt?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. He looked down at the blood as if he'd forgotten it was there. "Not mine." "Whose?" "Someone who needed to learn a lesson about loyalty." He started unbuttoning his shirt, revealing that scarred chest, those lean muscles. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to, Emma." But I was tired of not knowing, tired of living in this beautiful prison without understanding the bars. "I'm your wife. I deserve to know what you do, who you hurt." "You're my wife," he agreed, approaching me slowly. "Which means you're protected from the reality of what I do. You get to live in this penthouse, go to university, become a teacher, and never worry about where the money comes from or what I have to do to keep us safe." "That's not protection. That's willful ignorance. Then stay ignorant." He cupped my face in both hands, his gray eyes fierce. "Because the moment you truly understand what I am, what I'm capable of, you'll look at me with fear instead of anger. And I prefer the anger, Emma. I prefer you fighting me rather than being terrified of me." "I am terrified of you," I whispered. "No." His thumb traced my cheekbone. "You're terrified of yourself, of how you feel when I touch you, of how much you want this despite everything you think you should feel." He was right. And I hated him for it. Hated how my body responded to him. How my heart raced when he entered a room. How I'd started listening for his footsteps at night with something that felt disturbingly like anticipation. "This isn't real," I said desperately. "What we have, it's not real. It's just proximity and Stockholm Syndrome and—" He kissed me, cutting off my words, and I surrendered to it. Surrendered to him. My hands fisted in his hair, pulling him closer, and I felt his surprise before it transformed into something else. Something possessive and primal that made my knees weak. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. His eyes had gone dark, pupils dilated, and I saw the predator beneath the civilized veneer. "Still think this isn't real?" His voice was rough, raw. I couldn't answer. Couldn't think past the electricity crackling between us, the way my body was screaming for his touch, the way every rational thought had fled in favor of pure want. That night, I finally stopped fighting. I let him carry me to his bedroom. Our bedroom, he corrected. And I let him show me exactly what he'd been holding back. He was gentle despite the hunger in his eyes, patient despite the tension in his body. And when he finally made me his in every way that mattered, I understood what he'd meant about obsession. Because somewhere between the forced marriage and the carefully constructed cage, I'd fallen into my own obsession. With him. With the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered in his dark world. With the softness he showed only me. The vulnerability he trusted me with when the rest of the world saw only the monster. It was wrong. Twisted. Probably a dozen kinds of unhealthy. But it was ours. 3 months into our marriage, Dominic took me to the hospital, not because either of us was sick, but because Sophia had invited us to Marco's 6th birthday party. I hadn't seen them since the day at the restaurant, though Dominic had assured me they were thriving. Sophia was running Marchetti's successfully, and Marco was in a good school, happy and healthy. I'd sent gifts for the new baby, a girl named Isabella, after Dominic's mother, but I'd kept my distance, unsure of my place in their lives now that I'd become Mrs. Valentino. But Marco had specifically asked for me. For us. The party was in the hospital's community room. Sophia worked closely with the staff now, apparently, hosting events and fundraisers. The room was decorated with Spider-Man everything, and children ran screaming through the chaos with the boundless energy only 6-year-olds possess. Marco saw us immediately, his face lit up, and he ran over, skidding to a stop in front of Dominic with a gap-toothed grin. "You came. Mom said you probably wouldn't, but I knew you would." Dominic crouched down to Marco's level, and I saw several parents nearby, tense, recognizing him. But Dominic's focus was entirely on the boy. "I promised, didn't I? That night in the cafeteria, I said I'd sit with you." He pulled a wrapped present from inside his jacket. When had he gotten that? And handed it over. "Happy birthday, Marco." Marco tore into the paper with the enthusiasm of childhood, revealing a Spider-Man action figure, the expensive kind, the collectible that came in a special case. But Marco didn't care about value, he just saw his hero, and his joy was incandescent. "This is the best present ever. Thank you." He threw his arms around Dominic's neck, and I saw my husband freeze for just a moment before his arms came up to hug the boy back. Something in my chest cracked open. This man, this dangerous, violent man who'd blackmailed me into marriage and controlled every aspect of my life, was hugging a child with such careful gentleness, such unexpected tenderness, that I couldn't reconcile the two versions of him. Maybe that was the point. Maybe people weren't just one thing. Maybe monsters could have moments of humanity. Maybe I'd fallen in love with a man who was capable of both extraordinary cruelty and unexpected kindness. Wait. Love. The thought hit me like a physical blow. No. I couldn't be in love with Dominic Valentino. That wasn't part of the plan. This was supposed to be a transaction, a sacrifice, a noble gesture to save strangers. It wasn't supposed to become real, but as I watched him laugh at something Marco said, as I saw the way his entire face softened when he looked at this child who'd asked him to be a father for a day, I couldn't deny the truth anymore. I loved him. I loved this complicated, dangerous, impossible man who'd forced his way into my life and made himself indispensable. Sophia approached, baby Isabella sleeping in her arms, and she looked at me with understanding in her eyes. "You're happy," she said softly. It wasn't a question. I shouldn't be. I watched Dominic let Marco drag him toward the gift table, watched him move through a crowd of children with surprising ease. He's still the same man who threatened you, who threatened your son, and who saved us, Sophia countered, who gave us this restaurant, this life, who sent his personal doctor when Isabella was sick last month and paid for everything without being asked. People aren't simple, Emma. They're complicated and contradictory, and sometimes the worst person can do the best things. Or maybe I've just learned to love my cage. Maybe. Sophia shifted Isabella to her other arm. Or maybe you've learned that sometimes cages keep dangerous things out as much as they keep precious things in. Before I could respond, Dominic returned, Marco still attached to his hand. The boy was chattering about school and friends and his new baby sister, and Dominic listened with more patience than I'd ever seen him show anyone else. "Emma, did you see my present? Look!" Marco shoved the action figure at me, and I admired it appropriately, praising his choice of hero. "He's pretty cool," I agreed, though I always thought Spider-Man worked better as a team player. "That's what makes him awesome." Marco's eyes shone. "He helps people even when it's scary. Even when he could get hurt. That's what real heroes do." I glanced at Dominic and found him already watching me, something unreadable in his expression. "Yeah," I said softly. "That's what real heroes do." That night, back in the penthouse, Dominic pulled me onto the couch beside him. He'd been quiet since we'd left the party, processing something I couldn't quite identify. "Thank you," he said finally. "For today. For going. For being kind to him. I like Marco. I always have." His arm came around my shoulders, pulling me against his side. "That's why I married you, Emma, because you saw a lonely child and tried to protect him from me. Because you have this capacity for selfless kindness that doesn't exist in my world." "You were kind to him too," I pointed out. "You didn't have to sit with him that night, didn't have to come to his party, didn't have to give Sophia the restaurant. I did all of that for you." "No." I turned to face him. "You did it because you wanted to, because somewhere under all that carefully constructed ruthlessness, you're still human, you still feel things." He laughed, but it sounded bitter. "Dangerous things to feel. Feelings make you weak, make you vulnerable. In my world, vulnerability gets you killed. Then maybe your world needs to change." "It can't. I am what I am, Emma. I hurt people. I make decisions that destroy lives. I've done things that would make you sick if you knew the details. This," he gestured between us, "this doesn't change that. Loving you doesn't make me a good man." My breath caught. "You love me?" He turned those gray eyes on me, and I saw everything he'd been holding back. The obsession, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked like the flip side of the same coin I'd discovered in myself. "I've loved you since the moment you stood between me and Marco with terror in your eyes, but defiance on your face, since you chose to protect a stranger's child over your own safety. Since you walked into that cafeteria in a blue dress and let me remake your world. His hand came up to cut my cheek. I'm obsessed with you, Emma, addicted to you. And yes, somewhere in all that darkness I love you. Even though I probably shouldn't, even though you deserve better. Tears pricked my eyes. I love you too. And I hate that I do. I hate that you manipulated me into this marriage, that you threaten people I care about, that you're everything I should run from. But I can't. Because underneath all of that, I see who you could be, who you are when you let yourself be human. Then stay. His forehead pressed against mine. Stay in this golden cage with me. Let me love you the only way I know how. Possessively. Obsessively. Completely. Let me give you the life you deserve. Even if I'm not the man you deserve. On one condition. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. You stop threatening people I care about. You stop using fear as your primary tool. Not with Sophia, not with Marco, not with anyone I might come to care about. If you want me to stay, if you want this to be real, then you have to trust that I'm staying because I choose to, not because I'm afraid of what you'll do if I leave. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then slowly he nodded, agreed. No more threats. No more manipulation. Just us, however complicated that becomes. However complicated, I echoed, and kissed him. It was different this time. Not the desperate claiming of our first night together, but something softer, something that felt like a promise. Like maybe two broken people could find a way to be whole together, even if the pieces didn't fit quite right. 6 months later, I started my teaching degree. Dominic insisted on driving me to campus himself on the first day, despite the fact that it made absolutely no sense for the head of the city's most powerful crime family to chauffeur his wife to college. You're making a scene, I told him as students stared at the bulletproof SUV and the man in the expensive suit walking me to the education building. Good. Let them stare. Let them know you're protected. He kissed me at the entrance, proprietary and possessive, and I felt my cheeks heat with embarrassment and something else, pride. Because I was his. And he was mine. And somehow we'd made this impossible thing work. Classes were harder than I'd expected, but I loved every moment. Loved discussing pedagogy and child development, loved planning lessons, and imagining the classroom I'd someday have. Dominic would come home to find me buried in textbooks, and he'd sit beside me, asking questions about my studies with genuine interest. We hosted dinner parties, carefully curated events where I played the role of perfect wife, while Dominic conducted business in plain sight. I learned to smile and nod and pretend I didn't know what was really being discussed. I learned the art of selective ignorance, of being present without being complicit. It wasn't perfect. Dominic still disappeared for days sometimes, coming home with blood on his clothes and shadows in his eyes. We fought. Spectacular fights that ended with broken glass and slammed doors and makeup sex that left us both breathless. He was still controlling, still possessive, still dangerous. But he was also mine, and I was his. On our first anniversary, he took me back to that hospital cafeteria, the place where everything had started. We sat at table 7, the same table where Marco had drawn superheroes on napkins, and Dominic handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a key. To what? I asked, confused. A building, downtown. It's been converted into a community center, classrooms, after-school programs, resources for foster kids aging out of the system. His eyes held mine. It's yours, Emma. Run it however you want. Help as many kids as you can. Make the difference Mrs. Chen made for you. I stared at the key, then at him, and felt tears spill down my cheeks. Dominic, you saved me, he said softly. When I sat here with Marco, when I looked into that boy's eyes and saw his loneliness reflected back at me, something shifted. You made me remember what it was like to be human, to feel things beyond anger and ambition. So this, he gestured at the key, is my way of saying thank you for staying, for choosing me, for loving me despite everything I am. I launched myself at him, kissing him with all the love and gratitude and complicated emotion I couldn't quite put into words. Around us, the cafeteria's late-night occupants pretended not to notice, but I saw smiles on several faces. "I love you," I whispered against his lips. "My beautiful monster, my golden cage, my impossible choice, and I love you," he replied. "My salvation, my conscience, my Emma." We went home that night and made love with the kind of tenderness that only comes from truly knowing someone, all their darkness and light, all their flaws and virtues. And afterward, wrapped in his arms in our bed, I thought about the strange path that had led me here. From invisible to seen, from nobody to somebody. From terrified captive to willing prisoner to something else entirely. A partner. A wife. A woman who'd found love in the last place she'd ever expected. It wasn't a fairy tale. Prince Charming didn't threaten children or run criminal empires. But it was real. Complicated and messy and sometimes painful, but real. And in the morning, I'd wake up beside the man who'd stolen my freedom and given me everything else. I'd go to my classes, work toward my degree, and plan for the day when I could help foster kids the way Mrs. Chen had helped me. I'd visit Sophia and Marco, watch that little boy grow up safe and happy because of the impossible choice I'd made. And at night, I'd come home to my monster, my love, my choice. Because some cages aren't prisons. Some cages are sanctuaries. And sometimes, the most dangerous man in the city is the only one who truly sees you. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.